They say dogs are loyal no matter what, but what if that loyalty is tested in the worst possible way? This is the heartbreaking yet inspiring story of Max, a dog who endured unthinkable abuse only to shock the world with an act no one saw coming. Max was like any other playful puppy when he first entered his owner's home, but what should have been a life filled with love and care quickly turned into a nightmare. For 2 years, Max suffered at the hands of someone who should have protected him. Yet, despite the pain and betrayal, Max's heart held onto something extraordinary. What he did later left even his abuser in tears. This is a story of resilience, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Max's early days were filled with the kind of innocence and joy only a puppy could bring. When he first came home, his small paws stumbled over the carpet, and his tail wagged so fast it seemed like it might lift him off the ground. He would bounce around excitedly, chasing shadows, nibbling at socks, and curling up by the nearest set of warm feet to nap. His big brown eyes sparkled with curiosity and trust, ready to love and be loved in return. For Max, this was his family, and like every dog, he believed his family would always protect and care for him. But for Greg, Max was not a family member. He was a novelty, a spur-of-the-moment purchase to fill a fleeting sense of loneliness. Greg wasn't the kind of person who had ever considered the responsibilities of owning a pet. At first, he treated Max like a toy, showing him off to his friends and snapping pictures to share on social media. "Look at my new buddy," Greg would say, grinning as Max wiggled in his arms. But as the weeks turned into months, the novelty began to wear off. The once adoring smiles faded, replaced by sighs of frustration. It started with small signs. Max's food bowl would remain empty long after mealtime, and his water bowl would go untouched for days. Greg no longer played with Max, and the toys scattered around the house began to gather dust. Walks became infrequent, and Max spent most of his time confined to a corner of the living room, watching the world go by through a window he couldn't reach. The vibrant puppy who had once radiated energy now spent hours lying on the cold floor, his tail no longer wagging as often. Neglect turned into resentment. Greg's personal life was unraveling. He was struggling with mounting debts, problems at work, and a failing relationship. Every setback seemed to amplify his frustration, and soon, Max became an outlet for his anger. If Max barked, he was yelled at. If Max had an accident inside the house, Greg would shove him roughly outside, leaving him alone for hours. At first, Max didn't understand what he had done wrong. He would wag his tail cautiously, hoping to mend things with a lick or a nuzzle. But Greg's mood only darkened, and Max learned to keep his distance. The turning point came one evening, when Greg returned home after an especially bad day. He found one of his shoes chewed up in the hallway. It was a cheap old shoe, but to Greg, it was the final straw. Without a second thought, he grabbed Max by the scruff of his neck and dragged him outside. Max yelped in fear, but there was no mercy in Greg's eyes. That night, Max huddled in the backyard, cold and confused, wondering why the person he loved so much was now treating him this way. Over the following months, the abuse escalated. Greg's temper was unpredictable, and anything could set him off. A misplaced item, a spill, or even Max's presence at the wrong time could result in harsh punishment. Sometimes, Greg would shove him or hit him with whatever was within reach, a rolled-up newspaper, a shoe, or even his hand. Max would retreat to his corner, trembling, his once lustrous coat now dull and matted. Despite it all, Max never retaliated. He never growled, barked, or snapped at Greg. Instead, he continued to look at his owner, with eyes full of longing and confusion, as if trying to understand what he had done to deserve this treatment. For Max, Greg was still his world. He clung to the hope that things would get better, that the man who had once cradled him as a puppy would return. The neighbors began to notice. Late at night, they would hear faint yelps or the sound of shouting from Greg's house. Some whispered among themselves about the poor dog, but no one dared to intervene. "It's not our business," one neighbor said. "Besides, it's just a dog," another added dismissively. But Max wasn't just a dog. He was a living being, desperate for love and safety. Each day, he watched through the window as people walked by, some with dogs of their own. He longed to be outside, to feel the grass beneath his paws, to play and run freely. Instead, he was trapped in a house that had become a prison, his world shrinking with each passing day. One winter evening, the cold seeped into the house through poorly insulated walls. Greg had been drinking, his frustrations bubbling to the surface. Max had accidentally knocked over a small trash can while searching for scraps to eat. The sight of the spilled trash sent Greg into a fury. He shouted at Max, his voice echoing through the empty house. Max cowered in a corner, his body pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear. Greg grabbed the nearest object, a broom, and swung it at Max. The puppy let out a heartbreaking yelp, his body trembling with fear. After that night, something in Max changed. He stopped wagging his tail altogether. His playful spirit was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. The light in his eyes dimmed, and he moved through the house like a shadow, avoiding Greg whenever possible. Yet, even in the darkest moments, Max held onto a small glimmer of hope. It was in his nature to forgive, to love unconditionally. He didn't understand why Greg was angry or why he was being hurt, but he still believed that one day, things would get better. He still waited by the door each evening, hoping that the sound of Greg's footsteps would bring a kind word or a gentle pat on the head. But those moments of kindness never came. The cycle of neglect and abuse continued, and Max's world grew lonelier with each passing day. The once vibrant puppy who had entered Greg's home full of life and joy was now a shadow of himself, a dog who had learned to survive in silence, clinging to the faintest hope that someone, somewhere, might finally see him and offer the love he so desperately craved. For 2 long years, Max lived a life defined by fear, hunger, and loneliness. Each day blurred into the next, a monotonous cycle of pain and betrayal. Yet, despite everything, he never retaliated. Max's spirit, though battered, was not entirely broken. He would watch Greg cautiously from a distance, his eyes a mix of confusion and longing. Sometimes, when Greg wasn't paying attention, Max would inch closer, hoping for a rare moment of kindness, a pat on the head, a soft word, but those moments never came. Max's resilience was remarkable. Even as his ribs began to show through his thinning coat and his once bright eyes grew dull, he held onto a sliver of hope. He didn't know any other life. Greg was all he had ever known. Max's faith in humans, though deeply tested, wasn't entirely extinguished. There were fleeting moments when his tail would wag faintly, a silent plea for attention or affection. But Greg, consumed by his own frustrations and anger, never noticed. The neighborhood, however, did notice. Over time, neighbors began to see the stark changes in Max. Once a bouncy, lively puppy, he now skulked in the shadows, his body hunched and his movements slow. They heard the yelps late at night, the crashes of objects being thrown, and the angry shouts from Greg's house. Yet no one stepped in. Some justified their inaction, thinking, "It's not our business." Others felt helpless, unsure of what to do. Max's silent suffering continued, invisible to the world beyond the walls of Greg's home. One fateful day, everything changed. Greg's life, already unraveling, took a dramatic turn when he was arrested for unrelated charges. Police arrived at the house to take him into custody. Max, sensing the commotion, retreated to his usual hiding spot in the corner of the living room. The officers barely noticed the emaciated dog as they searched the house, gathering evidence and questioning Greg. Once Greg was taken away, the house fell silent, a silence that, for Max, was as unfamiliar as it was unsettling. At first, Max didn't understand what had happened. He waited by the door, expecting Greg to return. Hours turned into days. His food and water bowls sat empty, and the house grew colder with each passing night. Max scavenged for scraps, pawing through the trash for anything edible. He licked at a leaky faucet for water, his body growing weaker with each passing day. From his spot near the window, Max watched the world outside. He saw people walking by, children playing, and other dogs trotting happily alongside their owners. But no one noticed the gaunt, trembling dog behind the glass. Max's tail no longer wagged. Even his faint hope was beginning to fade. He lay on the cold floor, his breath shallow, his body too weak to move. Then, one evening, everything changed again. A sharp, frantic barking echoed through the neighborhood. It wasn't Max. It was another dog outside. The noise caught the attention of Lisa, a kind-hearted neighbor who had always felt uneasy about Greg's treatment of Max. She had heard the late-night yelps and had often thought about intervening but, like others, had hesitated. That night, however, something compelled her to act. Lisa approached Greg's house, peering through the window. What she saw broke her heart. Max was lying motionless on the floor, his thin frame barely rising with each labored breath. His once shiny coat was matted and dull, and his eyes, half closed, seemed to carry the weight of years of suffering. Lisa couldn't stand by any longer. She picked up her phone and called animal control. When the rescuers arrived, they were horrified by what they found. Max was severely malnourished, his ribs protruding sharply beneath his patchy fur. His body was covered in small scars, and his paws were cracked and sore from pacing on the rough floors. Yet, when one of the rescuers knelt down and called softly to him, Max did something extraordinary. He wagged his tail. It was a faint, hesitant wag, but it spoke volumes. Despite everything he had endured, Max hadn't given up on humans entirely. The team carefully carried Max out of the house and into their van. He didn't resist. He was too weak to struggle. Instead, he rested his head against the rescuer's arm, as if sensing that he was finally in safe hands. For the first time in years, Max was leaving the place that had been both his home and his prison. At the animal shelter, Max's journey to recovery began. He was given a thorough medical examination, and the results were grim. He was severely underweight, dehydrated, and suffering from multiple untreated injuries. Yet, despite his physical condition, the veterinarians and volunteers were amazed by his temperament. Max was gentle, cooperative, and incredibly trusting for a dog who had been through so much. One volunteer, Sarah, spent hours by Max's side, speaking softly to him and stroking his head. "You're safe now," she would whisper, her voice filled with emotion. Max seemed to understand. Slowly but surely, his tail began to wag more frequently. He started eating small meals, regaining his strength bit by bit. The shelter staff marveled at his resilience, calling him a miracle dog. Lisa, the neighbor who had called for help, couldn't stop thinking about Max. She visited the shelter often, bringing treats and toys, and sitting with him for hours. Max quickly grew attached to her, his eyes lighting up whenever she walked through the door. Lisa, too, felt a deep connection to Max. She saw in him a survivor, a testament to the strength of the spirit even in the face of unimaginable hardship. After weeks of recovery, the shelter deemed Max ready for adoption. Lisa didn't hesitate for a moment. She filled out the paperwork and brought Max home, determined to give him the life he had always deserved. For the first time in his life, Max experienced what it meant to be truly loved. Lisa's home was warm and welcoming, filled with soft blankets, squeaky toys, and the delicious aroma of home-cooked meals. Max had his own bed, a cozy spot by the fireplace, where he could curl up and feel safe. Lisa took him on long walks through the neighborhood, letting him sniff and explore to his heart's content. She introduced him to other dogs at the park, and for the first time in years, Max began to play again. But Max's journey wasn't just about physical recovery. It was about learning to trust again. At first, loud noises or sudden movements would send him cowering to a corner. He was hesitant around men, his past experiences leaving deep emotional scars. But Lisa was patient. She never forced him to do anything he wasn't ready for, letting him heal at his own pace. Slowly, Max began to come out of his shell. His tail wagged more often, his bark returned, and his eyes regained their sparkle. Despite the love and care he now received, there was a lingering sense that Max's story wasn't over. He had been given a second chance, but his past still shaped him in profound ways. Lisa often wondered if he remembered Greg, and whether those memories caused him pain. But Max, in his own quiet way, seemed to focus on the present. He had found a new family, a new purpose, and a new life. Max's transformation was nothing short of remarkable. From a broken, malnourished dog to a happy, healthy companion, he had defied the odds. His journey inspired everyone who met him, from the shelter staff to the neighbors who had once turned a blind eye. Max's story was a testament to the resilience of animals and their incredible capacity for forgiveness. But his journey wasn't quite finished. Little did anyone know, Max's past would soon come back in an unexpected and extraordinary way. 2 years had passed since Max was rescued, and his transformation was nothing short of a miracle. The once frail, frightened dog was now a picture of health and happiness. Under Lisa's care, Max had regained his strength and spirit, becoming a beloved member of her family and the community. His days were filled with long walks, playdates with other dogs, and endless affection. Max had moved on from his past, or so it seemed. But fate had other plans. Greg had served his sentence and was released from prison. His time behind bars had been harsh, forcing him to confront the mistakes of his past. Without his old house or possessions, Greg returned to the same neighborhood where he had once lived. Life outside prison was far from easy. He found work at a nearby factory, taking night shifts to make ends meet. His once proud demeanor was now replaced with a quiet humility, though his past actions weighed heavily on him. One crisp evening, Greg walked home from his shift, the streetlights casting long shadows across the empty road. As he cut through a narrow alley, he heard the low growls of stray dogs. Turning a corner, he froze. A pack of aggressive strays had surrounded him, their eyes gleaming with hostility. The dogs bared their teeth, inching closer with each passing second. Greg's heart raced. He shouted, waving his arms in a desperate attempt to scare them off, but the dogs only grew more aggressive. Panic set in. Cornered and defenseless, Greg screamed for help, his voice echoing into the night. He braced himself for the inevitable, shutting his eyes tightly. But then, a familiar sound pierced through the chaos. A loud, commanding bark. Greg opened his eyes to see a dog charging toward the pack. At first, he didn't recognize the animal, but as the dog came closer, Greg's breath caught. It was Max. Lisa had been walking Max nearby when they heard Greg's shouts. Max's ears perked up at the sound, his body stiffening. Lisa noticed the sudden change in his demeanor and tried to hold him back, but Max pulled against the leash with an urgency she had never seen before. He barked, his eyes scanning the direction of the noise. Reluctantly, Lisa let go, and Max bolted toward the commotion. What happened next left everyone stunned. Max didn't hesitate for a second. Despite the years of abuse he had endured, he threw himself into action. Barking ferociously, he charged at the stray dogs, his presence startling them. The pack hesitated, clearly unsettled by Max's confidence and size. One by one, they began to retreat, growling and snarling as they disappeared into the darkness. Greg stood frozen, his back pressed against the wall. His breathing was ragged, and his legs trembled beneath him. When he finally looked down, he saw Max standing before him, his tail wagging gently. Max's eyes were steady, calm, and, most shockingly, full of recognition. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was deafening. Greg dropped to his knees, overcome with emotion. Tears streamed down his face as he looked into the eyes of the dog he had once mistreated so horribly. "I'm sorry," Greg whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Max." Max stepped closer, his head tilted slightly, as if trying to understand the words. He sniffed Greg's outstretched hand, his body language calm and forgiving. Lisa, who had been watching from a distance, finally approached, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. Greg looked up at Lisa, his face a mixture of guilt and gratitude. "He saved me," he said, his voice barely audible. "After everything I did, he saved me." Lisa was speechless. She had known Max to be an extraordinary dog, but this act of courage and forgiveness went beyond anything she could have imagined. She knelt down beside Max, stroking his head as tears filled her own eyes. "You're incredible, Max," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. For Greg, the moment was a turning point. Seeing Max healthy and strong was both a relief and a painful reminder of his own failures. He had spent years justifying his actions, blaming his circumstances, but now, faced with Max's unwavering forgiveness, he couldn't deny the truth. Greg had been wrong, terribly, unforgivably wrong. Yet here was Max, standing by his side as if offering him a second chance. The news of the incident quickly spread through the neighborhood. People were amazed by Max's bravery and stunned by his capacity for forgiveness. The same neighbors who had once turned a blind eye to his suffering now gathered around Lisa's house, eager to meet the dog who had not only survived but thrived, and who had saved the man who had caused him so much pain. Greg, humbled and remorseful, began visiting Max regularly. With Lisa's permission, he spent time getting to know the dog he had once taken for granted. At first, Lisa was wary. She had seen the damage Greg had done and didn't want to risk upsetting Max's newfound peace. But to her surprise, Max welcomed Greg with open paws. Each visit was a small step toward healing for both of them. One day, as Greg sat on Lisa's porch, Max curled up beside him, resting his head on Greg's lap. Greg ran his fingers through Max's thick, shiny coat, a far cry from the matted fur he remembered. "You didn't deserve any of it," Greg said softly, his voice breaking. "I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Max responded with a contented sigh, his eyes closing as if to say, "All is forgiven." Lisa watched the scene from her window, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Max had not only changed her life, but had also touched the lives of everyone around him. His story was a powerful reminder of the resilience of the spirit and the boundless capacity for love and forgiveness that animals possess. For Greg, Max's actions became a symbol of redemption, He began volunteering at the local animal shelter, sharing Max's story with others, and working tirelessly to help other abused and neglected animals find their second chances. Through his efforts, Greg hoped to honor the dog who had saved him in more ways than one. Max's heroic act that night wasn't just a display of bravery. It was a testament to the power of forgiveness. Despite everything he had endured, Max chose compassion over anger, love over fear. His actions reminded everyone who heard his story that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for redemption and the possibility of a better future. And for Greg, that night marked the beginning of his own journey toward becoming a better man. As he often said to Lisa, Max didn't just save me from those dogs, he saved me from myself. Max's story is more than just a tale of survival. It's a profound reminder of the resilience, forgiveness, and unconditional love that animals possess. Despite enduring years of neglect and abuse, Max never lost his capacity for kindness. In the face of adversity, he didn't choose bitterness or fear. Instead, he chose to forgive, to love, and to protect, even when it came to the person who had wronged him the most. His unwavering loyalty remained unbroken, proving that the bond between humans and animals transcends even the harshest of circumstances. The day Max saved Greg's life was not just a moment of heroism. It was a turning point, a lesson for all who heard the story. For Greg, it was a chance to confront his past and seek redemption. For Lisa, it was a testament to the incredible strength and compassion of the dog she had come to love. And for everyone else, it became a powerful example of what it means to forgive and to move forward. Max's incredible act of courage didn't just save Greg from a pack of stray dogs. It saved him from a lifetime of regret and bitterness. In that moment, Greg's perception of Max shifted completely. The dog he had once treated as nothing more than a possession became the embodiment of forgiveness and second chances. Greg's tears weren't just of gratitude. They were of deep remorse, a realization of the love he had squandered and the harm he had caused. Today, Max's life is a stark contrast to the one he once lived. His days are filled with joy, warmth, and love. He enjoys long walks in the park, belly rubs from Lisa, and the companionship of other dogs. Max has become a beloved figure in the neighborhood, known not just for his friendly demeanor, but for his incredible story of resilience and redemption. Lisa often reflects on how Max has changed her life, too. He's not just a pet, she says to her friends and neighbors. He's a teacher, a healer, and a reminder that love is the most powerful force we have. She has even started sharing Max's story at local schools and animal shelters, hoping to inspire others to treat animals with the kindness and respect they deserve. Max's journey from abuse to heroism continues to inspire people around the world. His story is shared across social media, featured in articles, and discussed in animal advocacy campaigns. For those who have suffered or feel broken, Max stands as a beacon of hope, a living example that no matter how dark the past may be, there is always the potential for a brighter future. Through his actions, Max has shown that forgiveness isn't just about letting go of pain. It's about creating space for healing and growth. His courage and loyalty remind us that second chances are possible for everyone, whether human or animal. Max didn't just forgive Greg. He gave him a new lease on life, inspiring him to become a better person and to dedicate his time to helping other animals in need. As Max enjoys his golden years, surrounded by the love and care he always deserved, his story remains a testament to the power of compassion. It teaches us that even in the darkest times, love can endure, heal, and transform. Max didn't just change Greg's life. He touched the hearts of everyone who has heard his story, reminding us that sometimes the most extraordinary heroes walk on four legs. Max's legacy is one of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. It's a story that will be remembered for years to come, a shining example of the profound impact animals can have on our lives. If Max's story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more incredible animal tales, or click here to watch our next story about another animal's incredible journey.